Here are a few words I want to share with you before we bring up Dr. Sheryl Petty. I'm so excited that we work at an organization that's focused on race equity to transform educational institutions in order to increase the success of students of color and American Indian students. But that's the what. What about the how? The how, as we all know, everybody sitting in this room, takes students, parents, strategic plans, financial budgets, race equity lenses, basically a movement around individual shifts, organizational commitments, and measuring progress. And I was most recently reminded by this movement shifting as I listened this past Sunday to an amazing conversation I recommend all of you to listen to, the latest Krista Tippett on Being, conversation with Patrisse Cullors, co-founder of the Black Lives Matters movement, along with an elder in the African American community from the California Endowment, both talking about this latest social justice movement. The words that were just ringing in my head after I heard that talk were this, from Patrisse Cullors. We are not going to policy our way out of systemic racism in this country. So in that spirit, I think we chose the exact speaker that needs to speak with us today. I'm going to read a few things about her and then have her come up. You have a full description of her bio in your program. Dr. Sheryl Petty has worked on educational equity, organizational development, and systems change for over 20 years. She's a senior consultant with the Management Assistance Group and an associate consultant with Movement Strategy Center, in addition to her own practice, Movement Tapestries. She was most recently a principal associate at the Annenberg Institute, and she's also been a fellow at distinguished institutions such as Stanford. Please, round of applause to please welcome Dr. Sheryl Petty.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Is it morning? Afternoon. It's on the edge. The PowerPoint will be up in a second. I'm really happy to be here. I got an opportunity to participate this morning and hear the panel and Jose Lara speak. Half of you, maybe about half, who was here for the morning? Okay, good, half to 2/3. It was really inspiring and regrounding for me, I have to say. I'm kind of filibustering as we get the slide up. It was regrounding. I was mentioning to Carlos and Jennifer when we came in for lunch that environments like this, where people actually come to caucus, you all decided to come to a conference with an organization that has a focus on equity and a conference that has a focus in particular on race equity. That is a very specific conversation. It's not general, it's not generic, it's not the euphemisms that sometimes we have to use when we're in other circles, that we can talk really directly about things. So it really was inspiring and refreshing to hear about the work that's going on in LA, the profoundly inspiring work that's happened in Tucson, and that you all have come to continue to grow together and learn how we can help one another. So I'm going to have to either go back and forth and cue the slide, or thank you so much, help cueing the slide because we don't have a clicker. I'll say a little bit about myself and sort of where I come from, not in the bio, and then just kind of talk to you about these three things today, and I will try to be brief. I have my phone because I want to time myself, because we do want to save a few minutes at the end for some questions. Not soliloquies, but a little bit of dialogue with one another. So I'm from Detroit. I grew up there in the 70s. And if that means anything to anybody knowing things about this, what has happened, I grew up in the time when the automotive industry was departing. And so you can imagine what that felt like for my family and my dad, who actually worked for Chrysler. And I started teaching in 1995 in Oakland, in a high school in Oakland. And I got into this whole systems change thing, whatever that is, which we'll talk about in a second, when I got the opportunity to teach in a place where it was profoundly multiracial, you know, students from all kinds of backgrounds, a small high school. These were the students who had been put out of all the other high schools in the city of Oakland, California. And we're told, you know, these are hopeless. You know, we can't do anything with these folks. And we managed to perform what seemed like, there's a phone ringing. Perform what seemed like miracles. And you all know, those of you who work with young people in places that are loving and family-like and beautiful and inspiring, that it's not actually as miraculous as some people might think. And we had a school where there was no, oh, it got louder over here, where there was no violence, even though Oakland, like many urban areas, has lots of gangs. Now, isn't that interesting? How did we do that? So it's possible. And I started asking questions like, why is this not the norm? Why is this not normal? And that took me to what we're going to talk about today. So there's three things. I want to talk first about general approaches to systems change. What do people usually do when they say, we want to actually work on a whole school district, you know, or a whole city? What do people usually do, and what do folks usually not do? Then we're going to talk about us, how we show up in that. Each person. Systems are made up of people that do things that then have a profound impact. And then we're going to talk about movements. And it's going to go kind of fast. There'll be some time for you to talk with one another, and I'm going to bring you back and ask for your cooperation to come back before we close and do some questions and sort of move into the rest of the day. So we're in this together. All right. I'm ready. Oh, and we're here. So Carlos shared a beautiful vision for MnEEP, I'm saying it right? And you all who work in organizations or school districts, organizations of various kinds, have your own visions. Typically, systems change approaches start with some sense of vision, and hopefully they also start with values and beliefs, which we'll talk about in a second, because if they don't, there is no guide star. Nobody knows where we're going, and they're going based on their own internal locus, which is a problem. The next thing that usually is talked about, or not, are competencies. Sort of where are we going? What is success? What does that even mean? I have found that working with school systems, a lot of times you talk about vision and we skip competencies because we assume we're on the same page about those skill sets. And we've got standards, so, you know, we're just going to do that. And then there's the how do we get there? We start doing things, and we'll talk about a couple of buckets of what those things are, and some other things we actually ignore. So this is a sample vision. I actually want to blow right by it because I really was so happy and excited by the vision that Carlos shared. This is more a broader vision beyond education, because the question that I work with groups to answer, education is a part of a community. And what should that community feel like to people who live in it that education is contributing to? Right? So this is an example. People have come up with all kinds of wonderful things. Values and beliefs can sometimes look like these. A lot of times they don't. And I'll just give you a moment to peruse some of those. I actually had a conversation with someone once in a planning meeting where we were talking about self-reflection, and one of the participants there said, can we leave that one off? Because aren't the other ones much more important? Isn't that, you know, it just was too soft, it was too woo, it was too fluffy. Something was going on there, and we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about inner work. This partnering with and elevating the voices, and number 4, do we actually believe that folks have inherent wisdom? I mean, these values and beliefs can seem like a nice-to activity, but they actually anchor, you know, and when the going gets rough and you're trying to figure out where you're going, people can return to these. So I want to keep moving because these are offered as samples, as examples to say that in processes of systems change, values, beliefs, and vision actually need to be talked about and gone into in some depth and returned to periodically when we're confused about where we are. Okay, so now we get into what folks tend to talk about more often, and usually it's that first circle at the top. So we've got, does this Do you guys have a Common Core or you have something else? You have your own? Okay, okay. So standards, some note, we've got these expanded, there were what we had before the Common Core or the current version of standards, and we've got this sort of upgraded that has some good things in it. I'm not gonna throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are things that are useful in it. What's usually missing, and we talked about this a lot this morning with the ethnic studies panel, there are more robust competencies that youth and adult need to be developing, I would offer. And I pull them out because they're usually not measured, they're usually not in the curriculum, educators usually aren't prepared to support students to develop them, so they got pulled out here. Again, samples. Are people developing skills around cultural competencies, self-efficacy, and socio-emotional learning? Not just the young people, but also us, the adults. How often is that happening? Is that happening a lot? Raise your hand if you feel like that's happening a lot. It's happening all over the place. There's no one with their hand up. I want you to just know that. Nobody. Moving on from that, the third area, you can call it change agency, critical reflection. There may be some critical race theorists in here. There's a sense of what is going on in the world. How do I insert my agency into that? Wherever I'm located. How do I become actually an agent of change? Is that happening a lot where you all work? Anybody? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10-ish. Okay, amazing, because there are amazing places that are doing this, and the ethnic studies programs that were spoken about this morning, many of those folks, I am positive, are doing these things. I came from a school that did all these things, and I thought, why isn't this normal? We can do it with students who are 5 and 6 grades behind. This is not rocket science. So when we try to enact these things, whether we're focusing on the first circle or all three, here's what usually happens. We may have approaches that look like this structural and technical, or we may actually look at things like power and culture and relationships. So let's go to the next slide and look at the typical areas that are focused on in systems change. These should look familiar to you. You're in a planning process and somebody says, you know what we need to do? We need to get our assessment system to be improved. You know what we need to do? We need to really work on professional development. You know what we need to do? We should do something about the curriculum, right? Oh, and the opportunity to learn, access. What about access? That's really important. We're not just talking about achievement gaps, we're talking about opportunity gaps. And evolution, I mean, great. People were talking about that a long time ago. It came back, thankfully. It came back, that's good. These things are not trivial. They're not unimportant, and they're not easy. They're also not all. Now, the question is, are these things also a part of the planning process? Formally, not anecdotally, not in a sidebar bathroom conversation at the lunch table, but actually part of the systematic discussions that people are engaged in when they are engaged in a long-range process for an entire institution. Are they talking about, oh, we were at the table over here, we were talking about an institution where colleagues were sort of passing one another in the hall and actually not collaborating. I'm looking at item 3. I worked in a district on the East Coast. We were doing a process of helping them to understand how to engage communities more authentically, and the folks in the special education department and the folks in sort of the core curriculum department said, you know, we've worked here for 30 years and we've actually never collaborated to align our work ever. For 30 years. They said we'd never been in a planning process in a room together ever. So there are a set of activities related to building trust, related to whether or not that curriculum and instruction and assessment and support services are actually culturally responsive, related to whether or not people are learning about the experiences of marginalized communities, not just in a needs-based way, but in an asset strengths-based way, what is going on that's beautiful and amazing and incredible and powerful in communities. And is anybody actually talking about the politics of the decisions that we make and the impact that that's gonna have in power relationships as a formal part of planning? If you blend those two circles together, we could have some amazing systems change happening. I want to ask a show of hands just from people. Who, in your experience, is this slide happening pretty regularly? Is this happening a lot? 1, 2, 3, but 4. Okay, a handful, 1 or 2 handfuls. Okay, so we've got a problem, and the question is, if these things are left out, does it matter? Okay, because I would submit to you that in my experience working with districts and other kinds of organizations, foundations, universities, nonprofits, school systems, this is always the wall that's hit. Every single time. And people think, we don't know how to get systematic about that, or the emotional container, we don't know how to hold it, or we don't have time. I mean, we've got to get the other things on the first slide, which are really hard, and my God, we've got a deadline. Jesus, we've got to submit our plan. We have to submit our plan, which doesn't have these things in it, and they think the plan is going to be successful, which is a fallacy. Everybody in the room knows that. Okay, next slide. If that wasn't hard enough, there are people trying to do that work on those other slides, like me and you all out here, all of us. This is not frou-frou woo-woo stuff. We are emotional beings. We have feelings. Right now, people are having sensations, right? Someone asked me, how was I feeling coming up here? Was I nervous? And I'm noticing am my palms sweaty? Is my heart palpitating? Do I have a headache? Am I ready to talk to folks? We talk about SEL, socio-emotional learning for young people. I understand that the state is really thinking about adopting one of 3 states. This could be the 3rd state in the country to say as a state that socio-emotional skills are important for young people. Are they important for us? But the question is, if we're not walking our talk, what are the support systems, structures, et cetera, for adults to actually build that competency and that muscle? Folks are freaking out. You're in a classroom. That work is hard. That is not some lightweight. That's not. Whether you're working with young people or whether you're working with adults, it is complex, and we can compartmentalize ourselves and pretend like we're not feeling, but that's just not real. It's not true. So these words may be useful or not useful: presence, openness, clarity, centeredness, knowing when we are triggered, right? When my stuff is up. Somebody says something or something happened and I am flipping out, right? My head is going, I'm shutting down, I might get up and leave, or I might sit there and I'm just gone. I'm sitting with you and I am gone. And what am I gonna do when we get to the vote? Either I didn't hear it, I'm gonna stonewall, or I'm gonna do something crazy. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, all of these things are happening, these are humans. And then there's healing. The grief and trauma, I just really want to appreciate. I don't live in Tucson, I wasn't there. We watched a snippet of the video about the experience that people had in terms of the backlash, the incredible backlash that happened, and the activities, the fight, the struggle, the energy around trying to continue to keep that work going. And what folks experience every single day in schools and communities and in our homes, these things are traumatizing. Now, some of us are healed from that, and some of us are not. Now, we're all experiencing trauma, all of it. You can't live in the country of the United States and not have experienced trauma. Some of us, because we have used whatever tools or resources, which I'll talk about in a second, some of us have been able to heal from that trauma, and some of us are still carrying our wounds to every meeting and every interaction with each other, including sitting here right now. How do we make good choices and decisions with one another if we are wounded and we are not attending to that in whatever way makes sense for us? And those are personal as well as public and shared and communal choices. And the last thing I want to say on this slide, and we'll return to it, is this notion of courage and being brave. It's not a small thing. Things aren't always safe. Sometimes you have to do it anyway. Sometimes you don't know and it's really uncomfortable and you have to get up and wing it. And that's the best thing, because you know right down here. and connection and compassion. This is relational work. Can you cue the next one? Thank you. So I kind of already talked about this. You know, folks are also burning out. You know, there's all kind of ego things happening, flying around. You know, which is a form of insecurity. All kinds of things happening where people just stonewall you. We've seen what our own government legislators do and the impact that that has on people. So we know local, state, and national, and in our homes and communities, versions of this stuff that's real, and we can't pretend like, oh, that's just stuff and that's just how human beings are. No, we actually have to get tools and resources and use them. And they are abundant. So some of you do this stuff already, and I want to mention something really important. Again, a conversation I was having over lunch where it was mentioned, sometimes we think about self-awareness or self-care or inner work as a solo process, and I want to be really clear that that is not what I am talking about. That this is both me and we. This is me and us. I have to do my work, and we are in this together. You know, some of you may be familiar with mindfulness or meditation practices. As they have been secularized by largely white America, they look very atomized. It looks like I'm just talking about me and my own, and I'm navel gazing. That's not what's happening. That didn't come out of, that's not that practice. That's not what it is. That practice is about you pray for the well-being of every single being. You talk about all my relations. That is what this is about. So if you are doing any of these things, it is so that I am well, so that we are well, so that I can be better with you. And if we're not doing these things, then how am I showing up with you? Like, seriously. So for some people, that's a sacred tradition. You have a practice and a community that you may go to that you've been trained in or participate with, and that's maybe it's Christian, maybe it's Buddhist, maybe it's Islam, maybe it's Judaism, whatever it is, maybe it's indigenous. Wonderful. For some, it may be more secular. Maybe you're spending time with nature. Maybe you garden. Maybe you love playing with the animals in your house. Whatever you're walking, maybe you do some form of yoga, and maybe that's spiritual for you. Maybe it's not. Maybe it just feels good. Something that gets this flowing, because that stuff gets locked up. Stuff gets locked up. How much do we medicate? Sugar, coffee, TV, Advil, whatever it is, you know, sitting too much. I might ask you to get up in a minute, speaking of that. I might. So do things that move it around, that keep it open, because your mind works differently. This is neuroscience. They caught up. People knew that, but then they scientized it, so now it's a thing, right? So don't let it lock up on you. Your brain will actually function differently than what you can perceive, what you can hear, and what you can take in and not shut down on is more receptive, flexible when you do practices like this. This is not frou-frou and woo-woo. Tell me you don't know this. If this is not making sense to anyone, I would say sit. You know, sit with it. When you leave here, walk, take a walk, you know, go home, whatever you need. Just sit with it and let it, because babies understand. 3-year-old children get this. We have lost it because we've locked it all up. You know, wrap it up, put a suit on it, you know, go to the meeting, you know, and show up as your very best self like that. That doesn't even make sense. So if you aren't journaling, whatever it is for you, do that thing that makes you alive and thrive, because you will be a better person in your profession because of it, and we need that person now. Okay, I don't know what time it is, but I'm going to keep going. Okay, great. Okay, I'm not going to say anything about this. You all know, you know from your own experience what's happening, what isn't happening. There are a couple of places I heard about recently. A colleague who's in charge of professional development in the district of Louisville They're doing amazing things to integrate their principals, meeting on a regular basis, looking at the intersection of inner work and equity. So people are doing this. Like folks are not screwing around. Okay, now, we're gonna have to have a deal. So listen, this is gonna be 2 or 3 minutes. So when I call you back, you actually have to come back. Right? Okay. I just want you to, whoever's sitting next to you, maybe you want to chat with somebody who you haven't talked to before. Just what's coming up for you right now? Just, what do you think about your reflections? We talked about systems, structural, cultural, political, and then we talked about inner work. We're going to talk about movement building next, but I just want to do a little pause just for you to kind of download a bit. But I'm going to bring you back, so you got to, okay. A few minutes of just table talk. Okay, want to just hear a few reflections. This is the "Hi, I'm ready" signal. Right on. Thank you. So maybe just 2 or 3 popcorn. This isn't, time to say a whole lot. Just want to hear a little bit from maybe a couple of tables, just what came up before we go into part 3. And there's a roving microphone somewhere. And I'm sorry I haven't been speaking into the mic. It sounds really loud up here. So every time I get closer, I'm like, I want to talk softer. A couple of popcorn, just reflections from those table conversations.
Good afternoon. My name is Jamal Gibson with the P. People who knows me, that's how I introduce myself. Something we discussed was how one of our people at our table felt they were angry because they were so caught up in how to resolve an issue. They didn't necessarily take time for themselves to take a step back and take a deep breath. So as we discussed, I'm fortunate to have organization and managers where they make you take a step back in order to be focused on the work. They make you kind of take 30 seconds or a minute or 30 minutes, whatever you need to kind of get yourself mentally checked into the work, because it's such increasingly difficult work because you're working with people. And a person could change from one moment to the next. So just being able to be mindful of where you are and what space you're in is essential to becoming successful in your role. So.
Thanks. Maybe just one more somewhere else, if you like. I'm not going to force you. I mean, anybody who wanted to share anything. Oh.
We were just talking at our table about how one appreciative that you seem to be kind of giving us some tools to then take back to tables and do some trickery and get people invested in this. So it was really just the helpfulness of like, now we have the information. We need to go back to the tables, whatever tables we get to be at, and try to encourage those people then to take action, because there's a lot of people not in this room.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to say at the end of this PowerPoint, there are about 3 slides of resources. So hopefully you get this. This will be on the website or something. You can, like all kinds of resources for movement building, for inner work, for systems, equity. So organizations and videos and articles, so it's prolific. All right. So movement building, what is this? It means all kinds of things. I've had the privilege for about the last 12 or 13 years working as an associate consultant with an organization called Movement Strategy Center, which some of you may be familiar with. It's also in Oakland, California. It's a national organization, and I got to learn that movement building is actually a science as well as an art. Like it has some systematic qualities to it. So I'm going to talk about this in a number of ways. We've heard of a number of district-wide efforts this morning, profound things happening in LA Unified, the 2nd largest district in the country, with something like 800,000 students. There are also citywide efforts. I understand you all have a locus drive, Generation Next, and there are other sort of collective impact efforts. And I have a hard time with that term, I have to say, because it's a label for something that people have been doing for a long time, and then it got labeled. And it also often doesn't have an equity lens, so I put it in here to note this. Yes. So there can be education-specific efforts, which I'll talk about on one slide, and then there can be sort of broader citywide efforts that cross sectors: education, healthcare, housing, employment, because all of those things are interlocking, right? You try to pull one out, and the other thing gets sort of topsy-turvy. Ideally, they would have broad academic and other developmental outcomes, so social skills, academic skills, relational skills, cultural, political, change agency, all of these kinds of competencies would be important. And ideally, they would be grassroots as well as grass tops at the table together. Let's go ahead and the next slide. So education specific, a version or the domains that we all know you'd have to work in order to make movement building viable. Those little circles that are in colors, these are some of the most pivotal, influential domains of education that if you're not moving in them with an equity agenda, that's going to be the one that stalls you. So obviously practitioners at the heart of it with students and families. The educator preparation pipeline, I'm sort of going clockwise. That pipeline of who can actually, at both the teacher level and the administrator level, how are folks getting prepared with these kind of skill sets and competencies? We've talked about standards and curriculum. The technical assistance sphere, that's actually the sphere that I work in, primarily capacity building. When you need some help, who do you call? And do they have an equity lens? Policy and policy advocacy funders, there are probably another number of funders in the room. Assessment systems, we want those skills, can we measure them? That's the hard thing that people are trying to figure out now. We want that. Do we know how to measure that appropriately so that something doesn't get lost? Adult and youth community organizing, the research field and agenda, which is really influential because they say what's evidence-based, what's valid, what's quality, et cetera, and so forth. And media, not to underestimate how powerful, whether you're talking online or you're talking more traditional forms, that we all are getting sort of inculcated with what matters. So these are domains or spheres of even just within the education field. If you want to move things, you got to be moving across these in partnership with others. Okay, so I'm in the home stretch. I think there's like 2 or 3 more slides left. What makes this hard and what makes this work? I had to flip it, because I could just talk about challenges, but if we flip those around, then those are domains of agency, right? You got to flip them. You got to reverse them. So is the equity deep? How deep is it? What does deep mean? Folks are throwing around that word like it means something. Right? We're throwing that word around as if it's meaningful to everyone and it's becoming jargon, and it's a problem. So who is at the table? Which table? When did they get invited to that table? Was it the day before the meeting, the morning of the meeting, or after the first meeting already happened? Do people know how to share power? Do you know when to get up out of the chair and go to the back to let somebody else walk in the front? And is that comfortable or okay? And are you okay with another kind of leadership that acts and communicates differently? And are you okay with being uncomfortable even if you are? I'm gonna get up because I don't know what I'm doing for this part of the work. I know this part really well, I'm gonna lead this part. I don't know this part at all, but I'm gonna follow her, or I'm gonna follow her, or I'm gonna follow him, and I'm okay with moving, and I feel really uncomfortable, so I'm gonna do my inner work. Because I'm having a freak out moment about whether or not she'll do a good job. But if I stay in that front chair, I know I'm gonna mess it up. That goes back to the inner pieces. Uncovering where we do actually have bias, or I'm gonna use the racism word. And it's not always about race. Sometimes it's just about how we're engaging with difference. It's all kinds of difference. Race is big and huge, but we're talking about all kinds of difference. Me, I'm a bisexual person. So the full range of difference and experience has to be sort of engaged. And are we aware when that's coming up for us? Do we even know it? If you're not doing inner work, probably not. It's in operation, might not even notice, and people have to point it out, and then we look and we're like, whatever could you mean? I wonder what she's talking about. That happens all the time. What is real partnership? Privilege. We use that word all the time, and it's unfortunate that the words power and privilege sometimes are used as dirty words. That's a problem, right? The problem with power and privilege is when we are unconscious, when we are using them and wielding them in a way that we don't have awareness of what we're doing. I'm located. I have these degrees. I work in this organization. These are my social networks. I have this much money, these relationships. That is how I'm going to locate, be very aware, and this is how I'm going to show up as a partner. This is how I'm going to wield my power and privilege and influence and know when I need to get in the back seat or off the bus or push and support. The problem comes when we are not conscious. And now I'm going back to inner work. You can't get rid of it. You just can't. You can't let it go. Okay, and then the skill facilitation is about this real capacity building. I'm back to when you need some help, who do you call, and do they know what they're doing with an equity lens? When you need some help, who do you call, and do they have an equity lens? Usually they don't. Okay. So there's and you could skip to the next one too. There's a resource, a capacity building network, an equity-centered capacity building network that I worked with other people to help form so that we could aggregate some of those resources and out in the field so that people could find them. So when you look at the resource pages later, you can look them up. If you're like, who could we call? East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, South, we're all over the place. Now you can actually find some of us. So, no, we're not gonna do this, ignore that slide. Keep going. So I'm gonna say just one thing about this white awareness and white privilege. This came up this morning. I'm gonna say that word very directly. We all need to have our awareness and understanding, as I mentioned earlier, but there is a phenomenon, as we know, I'm gonna say this as if you know it because you wouldn't be here if you didn't. There's a phenomenon of dominant culture, that we act like it's the oxygen or the water and we're all just swimming in it. There is intentional, specific work, and there are resources and tools out there. There's trainings, there's articles, there's organizations, there's metrics, there's videos. And how many of you are familiar with this notion of a developmental continuum of awareness? Ooh, a lot. Maybe a fourth people in the room, that's great. If you're not, again, in the resource section, one of the organizations that can provide a resource for your institution or your group to assess itself on this continuum, from denial, what's going on, whatever could you mean, there's no problem, to polarization, oh, it's those people, or, oh, those people, I love those people. Or, I don't see color, you're just my best friend. You know, my best friend is black or Latino. Or to, okay, wow, I see. To, I see and I know how to be different. So I found this tool to be actually really powerful in institutions assessing themselves, and I'll say, apparently globally, most organizations fall on number 3. That's probably not a surprise to you because we think that's the promised land. We think the melting pot is the destination, and let's be clear that it is not, because erasure is not what we want, not for anybody. And to say this and to name it and to be like, because we think that it's a problem to see and notice, that's ridiculous. If you don't notice that I'm female, if I identify as female, then you can't see me. You're not even noticing who I am. That's ridiculous. So number 3 is not the promised land, it's a stage. And there's some helpful things to see our similarities, but you cannot erase the differences because we will be erasing the richness of who we are. along with the other complicated, horrific things that have occurred. You'll also be erasing the beauty. Okay. I'm really trying to end, and I swear the next slide says closing. Let's show them. I'm telling you, the next slide says close. See? Okay, look. All right, now, I promise, look. Okay. We started late. I'm serious. So this is the recap. Again, I flipped it. What usually goes wrong so that we can make it right? You gotta know so that you can address those things. So in the systems change approaches, what usually goes wrong is we separate out and we think we can do the structural things, the planning, curriculum assessment, and not do the political, cultural things. Fallacy. Put them together. If you don't know how, find people who do because they're out there and in your same organization and district. The lack of depth under number 1, I just want to really point that out. How often do you hear, we already do that? We're already doing that. And those with the deep equity lens say, no, you are not. And here's the difference. Being humble and open enough to hear that critique from someone who knows better. This is our inner work, so that when somebody says, wait now, we're doing something, but it's not enough, and there are consequences to it not being enough. Okay, the inner work. And you notice I put humility tools and practice for being human. These are tools of how do you be a human being? You know, I used to have a Buddhist teacher, and before we got into sort of the heart of Buddhism, she said, well, we're first going to talk about how do you be human with one another, and that has to do with you're self-reflective and aware enough and able to be called out and be okay with being called out. Oh, I'm mortified. That doesn't feel good. Okay, I'm still here because I love you. And we're on the planet together, and that matters. So when does that usually go wrong? We're not doing it. I don't have time. You know, I got the kids, I got my job, I've got, you know, whatever. I've got my, you know, I have 5 minutes. We make time for the things that matter to us. If it matters, ... Can't find the tools and resources, ridiculous. There's 3 slides on here. If you need more, call me. I'm feeling overwhelmed. Guess what? If you use the tools, that helps. And movement building. What do you usually have? People aren't at the table. Oh, we forgot. Oh, we didn't know. Oh, they showed up and we didn't know what to do with them. Because you're right, we do have to be ready when they show up, because guess what? They're not going to act just like us. Facilitation support, you can't just jump in the pool and think it's gonna go well. Just too many stories of things blowing up in people's faces, and you got the community like, we're not touching that with a live wire, and a decade goes by, and people's lives are being ruined because that community or that organization has said, we tried that, it didn't work. Why? Because the design was poor. Ego, you know, turf wars, et cetera, people taking their toys and leaving, or acting like they're invested and they really have to sign their name on the paper, but there's no real skin in the game. No inner work. When it's not real, when the partnerships aren't real and everybody knows it. And the last one is a low common denominator. We couldn't agree on the hard stuff, so we picked something easy that doesn't matter as much. And the kind of changes that we need to happen aren't because of that. You need better design. Okay, I'm ending. This is the end, I promise you. I'm sorry I went over. We started late. Okay, the tools exist, but they're fragmented. The people doing systems change and the culture, and they're not the same people. The structured technical people and the social cultural, they aren't the same people. The inner work people, that's another group of people. And the movement building people have some overlap with, everybody's got to get together, at least in a room, and share expertise. To me, that's movement building. We all have to do our work and be humble. I'm a learner. I hope we all are. Thank you. I'm going to stop talking. Thank you.